Hello and welcome friends. Scotch is malt whisky or grain whisky made in Scotland. All Scotch whisky was originally made from malt barley. Commercial distilleries began introducing whisky made from wheat and rye in the late 18th century. Scotch whisky is divided into 5 distinct categories: single malt Scotch whisky, single grain Scotch whisky, blended malt Scotch whisky, formerly called vatted malt or pure malt, blended grain Scotch whisky, and blended Scotch whisky. All Scotch whisky must be aged in oak barrels for at least 3 years. Any age statement on a bottle of Scotch whisky expressed in numerical form must reflect the age of the youngest whisky used to produce that product. A whisky with an age statement is known as guaranteed age whisky. The first written mention of Scotch whisky is in the Exchequer Rolls of Scotland, 1495. A friar named John Core was the distiller at Lindores Abbey in the Kingdom of Fife. There are 2 basic types of Scotch whisky from which all blends are made. Single malt Scotch whisky means a Scotch whisky produced from only water and malted barley at a single distillery by batch distillation in pot stills. Single grain Scotch whisky means a Scotch whisky distilled at a single distillery, but in addition to water and malted barley may involve whole grains of other malted or unmalted cereals. 3 types of blends are defined for Scotch whisky. Blended malt Scotch whisky means a blend of 2 or more single malt Scotch whiskies from different distilleries. Blended grain Scotch whisky means a blend of 2 or more single grain Scotch whiskies from different distilleries. Blended Scotch whisky means a blend of 1 or more single malt Scotch whiskies with 1 or more single grain Scotch whiskies. Malting. This is the first stage in the process. The barley is harvested in the field and then taken to the maltings. Here it is steeped in water and then spread out on malting floors to germinate. After about a week of germination, the barley goes to the kiln for drying. This halts the germination. Mashing. The dried malt is ground into a coarse flour or grist, which is mixed with hot water in a large vessel known as the mash tun. The mash is stirred in the mash tun, and this converts the starch in the barley into sugary liquid called wort. Fermentation. The wort is cooled and pumped into wash bags where yeast is added and fermentation begins. Distillation. Each distillery has a different shape and size of pot still, and this is crucial to the individual character of each whisky. Malt whisky is distilled twice, the first distillation taking place in a larger wash still and the second in a slightly smaller low wines or spirit still. The maturation process. Scotch whisky must be distilled in Scotland and left to mature there for a minimum of 3 years before it can be called Scotch whisky. The art of blending. Blending was invented in 1853 by Andrew Usher, and at the dawn of the 20th century, blended whisky took the world by storm. The technique the blender uses is known as nosing. He does this in a tulip-shaped glass which is designed to maximize the aroma of the whiskies.
My name is Brendan Coyle. I'm the distiller here at High West Distillery in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we're talking about Scotch whisky today, and specifically how do you make a Scotch whisky. First of all, by its very definition, Scotch whisky has to be made in Scotland, so you can't really make a Scotch whisky outside of Scotland, but you can make a Scotch-style whisky, which is going to be comprised of a single malt would be 100% malted barley, which is what I have going on here right now. That means your entire grist bill is 100% malted barley, so it's barley that's been allowed to germinate for a short amount of time, grow for a short amount of time, and then you terminate that growth with kilning and higher temperatures. So a single malt would be 100% malted barley, whereas a blended malt would be a blend of malts. And they have other Scotch whiskies that aren't from malted barley, but from grains such as corn, wheat, things like that. But traditionally, when you're talking about Scotch, you're talking about all malt whiskey. They would use a still similar to this without this column right here. This is the pot of the still. This is the head. This is a column, that's the condenser. A traditional Scotch-style pot whiskey still will not have a column like this. It'll go directly from the pot to the head, and this pipe will come over directly to a condenser. This makes for a more rich, flavorful whiskey. All this column 4 right here is for purification matters. This is a laboratory still we use here for new products and things like that. So it's nice to have this column here when we want to use it. But for this specific distillation, I'm not even using it right now, but we're going straight over into the condenser. So each Scotch whiskey has its own unique flavor, and one of the reasons for these unique flavors that the distillers over in Scotland will tell you is the shape of their still. Each still is a little bit different shape over in Scotland, which lends to a slightly different whiskey on a small level. So as they say, there's no bad Scotch whiskeys, just some are better than others. So go try one. There's a lot of fantastic examples in the States right now. So once the spirit comes over into the condenser, it comes out as a white clear spirit, as it is right here. You'll take the middle cut of the spirit. The first cut is a little bit too pungent. There's some flavors and aromas that you don't really want in the middle cut. You take the end cut, you get rid of both of those, and then you have this middle spirit cut with all the proper flavors and aromas that you want. This then goes into an oak barrel and ages for a number of years, minimum 3 years as far as Scotch whiskey is concerned. You can't call it a Scotch whiskey until it's been aged for at least 3 years. And after that point, it's really the distiller's decision for what kind of product they're looking for. So go try a Scotch whiskey. There's plenty of lovely examples on the market today.
Cheers. Good day to you.